Good morning, and welcome to this assembly celebrating the 250th anniversary of the birth of one of our former pupils. As you know, the Royal High School is nearly 900 years old, and over that time we've had a number of pupils who've gone on to gain fame in their lives, and I'm sure we'll have many more to come. One of the most famous former pupils is the writer, Sir Walter Scott, and on the 15th of August this year we celebrate the 250th anniversary of his birth. To help us with this, we have some words from a couple of people. Firstly, we will hear from the Lord Provost of Edinburgh, Frank Ross, who will tell us about the relevance of Scott today. Then we will hear a bit about the life of Scott from Sandra Mackenzie of Abbotsford House. So first, if I could call upon the Right Honourable, the Lord Provost Frank Ross to speak to us.
Mr. Rutter, thank you very much for your introduction. I think it's great that our Royal High School, which is itself 893 years old, is celebrating the 250th anniversary of the birth of one of the school's former pupils and one of Edinburgh's leading literary minds, Sir Walter Scott. Just like the Royal High, our great city of Edinburgh has an ancient history and our roots, where we come from, how we've developed, how our city, our society and our communities have matured, tells us something about ourselves in modern cities, society today. Both our school and our city have come from simpler times, from a period where only a small number of people were living in the centre of the town to when areas like along our coast became increasingly used for trade and manufacturing. And indeed when more people arrived seeking jobs and improved living standards. As the volume of our citizens grew, our city gradually modernised and we improved our architectural style, established academic and other institutions, built more housing, schools and roads, and introduced welfare and other social programmes to assist our most vulnerable communities. Now today, Edinburgh is a leading international capital city known for a very strong commercial and finance centre, a hub for culture, education and tourism, and above all, a place where people of all faiths and traditions continue to be more welcome to visit, work, play and of course stay. Indeed, you may be interested to know that our city has witnessed many strong connections with a variety of famous people, from kings and queens like Mary Queen of Scots to James IV, Edward VII and of course our current monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. But we've also had a range of great people from a variety of different fields, from architecture with Robert Adam to the banker Thomas Coutts, to British statesmen and Lord Chancellor Henry Peter Brougham and many famous women such as Elsie Inglis establishing a hospital here in the city. And whilst you may not know all of these names, some were Edinburgh contemporaries of author and explorer Sir Walter Scott across his lifetime, and with whom he may have engaged with, perhaps in the assembly rooms in George Street, a famous place for people meeting in the city. And even in his early and lifelong education, Sir Walter Scott embraced our city's long heritage, and this is evident in his many written works. As a prolific and high quality author, Sir Walter gained prestige and influence both nationally and internationally, as his historic novels and poetry and plays were not only an important influence on romantic literature, theatre, painting and music in this country, but in many other countries, but they also helped challenge social attitudes and provided a basis for improved engagement across the social classes of his day, but have stretched beyond that into modern society. Sir Walter was also seen as an innovator, arguably helping to establish today's modern historical fiction novel and presenting a fresh perspective on the culture and traditions of the landscapes of the Scottish Highlands. Today, Scott's contribution helps Edinburgh maintain its UNESCO City of Literature status with the university's Scots Digital Archive, the Writers' Museum dedicated Scott Room and the National Library of Scotland's collection, all available for us to study. Indeed, in the films Ivanhoe and Rob Roy, they offer us a big screen version of the original works. I suspect many of you will know Sir Walter from your school studies or from our world famous Gothic style Scott monument opened in 1844. The 288 step tower, if you've ever managed to get to the top, is the world's second largest monument commemorating a writer. Hopefully following today you will want to read or watch some of Sir Walter's works, or even challenge your fitness in taking that 288 step walk up the tower. But please be safe, keep safe and secure in the current COVID environment, and enjoy your continuing journey with Sir Walter Scott. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost, for placing Sir Walter Scott into a modern context for us. Next, we're going to hear from Sandra Mackenzie of Abbotsford House, Sir Walter Scott's former home, which is now a museum. Thank you, Sandra.
Hi everyone, my name is Sandra Mackenzie. I'm the Heritage Engagement Manager at the Abbotsford Trust. Thank you so much for inviting me to take part in your assembly today about Sir Walter Scott, one of the Royal High School's most influential and famous former pupils. Okay, so the Abbotsford Trust is a small independent charity which owns and cares for Abbotsford, a heritage site in the Scottish borders near Galashiels. 2021 marks 250 years since Sir Walter Scott's birth, and we're encouraging everyone in Scotland to celebrate and mark this important anniversary with us. So Scott was born in 1771 in Edinburgh, and from a young age was fascinated with history and Scotland's past. His interest in the past and his own border family history was kindled by his early life at Sandyknow Farm in the Scottish borders near Kelso. He was sent here as an infant to live with his grandparents as he'd caught what we now know to be polio. Whilst recuperating in the fresh air and light away from the crowded, smoky conditions in Edinburgh, Scott eagerly absorbed his family's tales and songs and lore about the history of the borders, a lawless, contested land that bore the scars of raiding Scottish and English armies and the constantly shifting border between two countries. So when Scott was 7 years old, he returned back to the family home in George Square and began school at what was then the High School of Edinburgh in Infirmary Street. So that shows you a picture of it there. So you probably now know that that is part of the University of Edinburgh and it's their archaeology department. After school, Scott worked within his father's law practice, and then he went to university to study law, and he finally graduated. He was called to the bar as an advocate in 1792. Now, in terms of his creative work, he began to collect what are called border ballads by riding out into far-flung communities deep in the borders countryside with his friends, meeting people and listening to their ballads. These are sung stories recited from memory and never normally written down, which describe tragic battles, doomed lovers, reavers, kings, witches, fairies, hauntings, and revenge. Scott collected and published these ballads as the minstrelsy of the Scottish border. And he believed that the parliamentary union with England, which had taken place in 1707, had been a positive choice for Scotland economically, but it potentially could lead to a loss of our unique Scottish culture. And he was keen to capture this sung tradition before it was lost forever. He began to produce poetry influenced by the border ballads which he'd collected. So his most commercially successful poem, The Lady of the Lake, broke all records for the sale of poetry. It was set in the rolling hills around Loch Catchin in the Trossachs, just north of Glasgow. And his ability to blend the real and the imaginary through his poetry kick-started the Scottish tourism industry, as his fans flocked to experience the real places he captured and described so evocatively. The slide here shows Scott's home at Abbotsford, which he created. So with the income from his salaried jobs and his poetry, he began creating this magnificent place. He worked with 3 different architects over 12 years and a group of friends, theatre owners, artists, painters, antiquarians, to design and furnish his home. He was a storyteller, but really an antiquarian at heart, a person who studies history through artifacts, manuscripts, or objects. Abbotsford is not only a repository, a display space for all Scott's objects and collections, but it's also really an object itself. He called it a museum for living in and a conundrum castle. And I think the slide really shows you the strange magpie collection, picking up on references of all different types of Scottish architecture from the past, crow-step gables, turrets. And Scott wasn't really interested in creating a museum as we now understand it. His aim was to create a palace of his imagination, where he could live, work, and entertain his friends, and where he could surround himself with material culture. So things created, used, and lost by the people of the past to fire his creative imagination and allow him to enjoy living in the past in a way. In 1814, Scott had established himself as a poet. He'd been offered the poet laureateship, he turned it down. He said he didn't want to write to demand. But it became clear that his style of poetry was falling out of fashion. So there was younger poets such as Lord Byron were coming up, and their work was much more dramatic and much more emotional, and people were much more interested in it. So what was he going to do? He turned to a different form of writing. So he eventually published a novel called Waverley, which was the world's first historical novel based on the doomed Jacobite rebellion of 1745. And the response was phenomenal, and it established him as a novelist with an international reputation. He went on to publish 27 novels in only 12 years, and the slide here that you can see is Rob Roy, one of the most famous novels, and created the very first commercially successful historical novels. So these are stories based on real places, real people, and actual historical events, such as the Jacobite Rebellion, which blend facts and fiction together to produce thrilling adventure stories and tragic romances. So he wasn't just focused on his own career. He was a child of the Scottish Enlightenment, and he was brought up in one of the most exciting cities in the world, surrounded by new and challenging ideas about our world, humanity, religion, and science. And his interest in history is not just simply facts and figures, although he sought out primary and secondary sources for all his works. He understood that the present, our moment in time, is destined to become history itself, and the past influences the present. He explored these ideas through his works, pondering the influence of historical events on the lives and fates of his characters. His greatest hero was Shakespeare, and if you studied Shakespeare at school and then give Scott's writing a bit of a whirl and have a read, you can't help but notice the similar structure of plot twists and turns. His writing started our tourism industry and established Scotland as a destination, but also paved the way for modern novels and storytelling. And without him, we arguably wouldn't have things like Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Harry Potter, and Game of Thrones and Outlander. In 1818, Scott was granted permission to search Edinburgh Castle to rediscover the lost honours of Scotland, the crown jewels that you can see in the slide. They'd been packed away, first for protection, but then secondly after the Union, the Parliamentary Union in 1707, and not really brought out or seen again. So Scott felt that this was important, that this was a symbol of Scottish national identity. He asked George IV, the king here in the painting, his permission to go into the castle and find the honours of Scotland. And then later in 1822, stage managed, engineered a visit by George IV to Edinburgh, in which the honours were brought out and they were shown to the people, and they've been on display ever since. Scott understood that Scotland's identity and sense of itself, its traditions, customs, language and heritage were potentially under threat, and that national symbols such as tartan, the monarchy and the crown jewels were important to restore and preserve this national identity. Now, like or loathe these symbols, they have put our tiny country on the map. We have a small population, we're on the edge of Europe, but just think, all around the world, people know Scotland. So 2021 marks the 250th anniversary, and we're encouraging everyone to come to Abbotsford to visit and find out more about Sir Walter Scott. So you can visit for yourself if you're interested during the summer holidays with your family. There's something for everyone of all ages. Fantastic historic house to see and gardens. We have a visitor centre, free parking, we're near the railway, we have a play trail, lots of fantastic walks all around our estates and gardens. And this exhibition gives you lots more detail and information about Sir Walter Scott's life. So find out more about visiting us and about all the other 250th anniversary events, both that we're putting on and other people around the country at the Walter Scott 250 website or our website, or do follow us on our social media platforms as well. I do hope this has given you a bit of a background about Scott and about the anniversary, and I do hope that we will see you down at the borders soon. Thank you so much.
Three, two, one. Thank you, Sandra, for that interesting look at the life of Sir Walter Scott. After the summer holidays, when we return, we'll be running a number of events based around Sir Walter Scott and his works, so there's plenty of time for you to catch up on reading some of his excellent books. Thank you very much, Royal High.